Sing high, sing low. With Bash Kennett.
Let's sing high and let's sing low of our country long ago, how the people made it grow. Come and hear this story. Let's take pioneering trips, railroads. Railroads? Say, that's a story I'd like to tell you. The one about building the Transcontinental Railroad, the first Transcontinental Railroad. Do you know it? Well, if you do, you know that actually the railroad didn't start just in one place, but it started in two places. It started in the east and in the west, and they built the railroad until it finally met. Can you guess why the people in the west, for example, were interested in having a railroad? Well, gold had been discovered around that period of time, and the grocers and the merchants and the hardware men were all interested in having many supplies to sell to the miners. And so they put their money up, saying, we will build the railroad from this end of the country, from the western end. And it was called the Central Pacific. And then in the east, people were interested in having a railroad too, because, well, they wanted to travel west for one thing. And then Lincoln had felt that our country would be much happier if it were a unified country, and the railroad would help to do this, help us to feel as if we were all one country. And so the people in the east were happy to think of building a railroad, and they started. Lots of the people that built the railroad were men from the Civil War who had been fighting and then came to the railroad to help build from there, from the east. The east, of course, had railroads before. This was not the first railroad in our country by any matter of means. And in fact, they had songs about railroads. And here's one that you might know that's called Down in the Valley. Down in the valley, valley below, hang your head over, oh, hear the wind blow. Hear the wind blow, love, hear the wind blow. Hang your head over, oh, hear that train blow. Roses of sunshine, violets of dew, angels in heaven, oh, no, I love you. No, I love you, love, no, I love you. Angels in heaven, oh no, I love you. Build me a castle 40 feet high, so I can see her, oh, as she goes by. As she goes by, love, as she goes by, so I can see her, oh, as she goes by. Well, out in the west, the job of building a railroad was truly a big one. For in the west, as you know, there are mountains, high mountains. Mountains that, well, are almost like buildings that just jump up from a sidewalk. And this meant lots and lots of work. For here was bare rock that was hard to get a hold of, rugged canyons. And the Chinese were part of the great labor force that actually helped to build the Central Pacific, or the western end of the Transcontinental Railroad. And if you're wondering how they got here, or came out west, the story seems to be that Mr. Crocker, Charles Crocker, who was one of the 4 bosses of the Central Pacific Railroad, had a Chinese handyman whose name was Ah Ling. And Ah Ling was very devoted to Mr. Crocker, and so was very worried when he heard Mr. Crocker say he was having a great deal of difficulty getting men to work on the railroad, for they would much rather go to the gold fields, and they would just pick up their shovels and their picks and go off seeking gold and never mind building the railroad. So Ah Ling sent for a whole boxcar full of his friends from San Francisco, and up they came, and they stayed and helped build the railroad. In fact, the Chinese labor was so successful that many ships were sent from San Francisco to China in order to bring men back, especially for that purpose. Well, the Western people had lots of wood, and that meant wood to make the ties, and lots of rock to make the road bed. And this helped too. All of the dirt had to be moved by donkey. In fact, just to make a little fill, it would have to be done shovelful by shovelful. And the Chinese were also responsible for thinking up the wicker basket. When they came, for example, to a place where a trestle had to be built, such as this one, they would dig or blast around the area in order to have a smooth place to put the trestle out over. And in order to do this, they found that that wicker basket that they could make themselves, and then suspend by ropes, they could travel up the cliff and down the cliff wherever they needed to, and plant dynamite or some other explosive in order to smooth out, say, the side of a canyon, or to tunnel in if that was necessary. Well, in the East, things were a little different. A lot of the Eastern labor force was made up of Irishmen. They were sometimes called the Terriers. I suppose they were probably, well, maybe eating stew while the Chinese were eating their rice. At any rate, they worked hard too. And they had, well, somewhat different problems. They had to battle the desert as they crossed the plains, and they didn't have the wood, which had to be shipped in from great distances. And they didn't have as much water. This had to be brought in by barrels. And besides that, they had the matter of the Indians. Tunnels and Indians were probably the two big problems that faced the Irishmen. The blasting of a tunnel was a tremendous job and took many long hours of work. And the Indians provided probably the second most difficult aspect of their lives, for they not only had to have a shovel and a pick in their hand, but frequently a gun also. See, the Indians were quite unfriendly, and there was good reason for it. For the men were coming along and sort of muddying up their streams, and this meant that their fishing wasn't any good. And also, they destroyed lots of the grasses that was the natural food for the buffalo. Of course, the buffalo, as you know, was the Indians' food. So the Indian wasn't very happy to see the railroad go through. There's a song called Drill Ye Terriers Drill that sort of tells the story of the Irishman and his contribution to Transcontinental Railroad. Goes like this. Every morning about 7 o'clock, there's 20 terriers a-working on the rock. And the boss comes around and he says, keep still and come down hard on the cast iron drill. Drill ye terriers drill. Drill ye terriers drill, and work all day for the sugar in your tay. Drill ye terriers drill, and blast and fire. And our new boss was Jim McCann. B'gosh, he was a darn good man. One day a premature blast went off, and a mile in the sky went big Jim Goff. And drill ye terriers drill, and drill, and work, and blast. Next week when day came round around, Jim Goff $1 short was found. When he asked the reason, come this reply, you're docked for the time you was up in the sky. And drill ye terriers drill, and drill ye terriers drill, and work all day for the sugar in your tay. And blast and fire and a drill. probably know that there was a big race between the East and the West, and even all of the problems between, oh, say, Indians, or whether it was mountains or tunnels or trestles, the men worked very hard, and they were anxious to lay just as much track as they possibly could. For example, in the eastern section, as the track was laid along, towns would spring up. And there would be, oh, say, like a town like Cheyenne, Wyoming. Just wasn't in existence one day, and the next day there was a whole boom town that suddenly started. And these, of course, were kept in later years as stations, as we know them today. Well, those boom towns developed all along the way, and the men would build a camp, lay the track in front of that, then move up along the track, and build another camp, and so it went on along. Mr. Crocker's group took the prize for laying the most track. In fact, this is a record that still holds today. They laid 10 miles of track in 18 hours, and this seems almost unbelievable. Well, the men worked as teams in complete cooperation and at a great rate of speed. And finally one day, the two engines met. And this was at that most historic place called Promontory Point. And this was where the Golden Spike was driven, and it signified the meeting between East and West. And at last our country was completely linked by rail. And of course, from that time on, the trains have gone across the country, going by one another. Trains mean many things to many people. I don't know what a train means to you. Maybe you've taken a trip overnight, say in a Pullman, slept overnight on a train. That's lots of fun. Or maybe your father ships things by train, maybe in the big box cars, or perhaps in an oil tanker. I'd like to sing you a song about a man who looked at a train from a jail window. He called it the Midnight Special. This is the way it goes. Well, you wake up in the morning, hear the ding-dong ring, go marching to the table, see the same darn thing. Well, it's on the table, a fork and a pan, and if you say anything about it, you're in trouble with the man. Let the Midnight Special shine its light on you. Let the Midnight Special shine its ever-loving light on you. Well, the biscuit's on the table, just as hard as any rock. If you try and eat 'em, break a convict's heart. My sister wrote a letter, my mother wrote a card. If you want to come and see us, you'll have to ride the rods. Let the Midnight Special shine its light on me. Let the Midnight Special shine its ever-loving light on me. Yonder comes little Rosie, how in the world do you know? I can tell her by her apron and the dress she wore. Umbrella on her shoulder, piece of paper in her hand. Well, I hear her tell the captain, I want my man. Let the Midnight Special shine its light on me. Let the Midnight Special shine its ever-loving light on me. Let the Midnight Special shine its light on me. Let the Midnight Special shine its ever-loving light on me.
This is National Educational Television.